We're going to have live reactions, live analysis to everything leading up to the 6 p.m. trade deadline. The Orioles have already made a move today. We're going to talk about that. We will see if any more moves are made leading up to the deadline. It has been an exciting stretch thus far. The Orioles have already acquired Zach Eflin, Sir Anthony Dominguez, Christian Pache. Today they make a move for Trevor Rogers. There could be more moves in the next 12 minutes. So it's an exciting time here in Birdland as the Orioles are looking to add the pieces to help push them over the top as a potential World Series contender.
Yeah, there's some exciting things. It's also very nerve-wracking time for both fans as well as players. I know that some of them in the clubhouse have already said it's kind of a stressful situation, as always, before 6 p.m. Just kind of don't know where you're going to stand. But alas, the time will come in 11 minutes. And we kind of know that they've worked a lot on pitching so far in those few trades for Eflin and whatnot, as well as today with Rogers. But still some needs out there, both in bullpen arms as well as right-handed hitters.
Yeah, let's start with the Trevor Rogers trade, which the Orioles made this afternoon. Trevor Rogers, a left-handed starting pitcher, formerly of the Miami Marlins, comes to Baltimore in exchange for Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers. I think the first and most important thing to note about that trade, just in general around baseball right now, is that the market for starting pitchers is ridiculous. We saw it with the Astros giving up a ton for Yusei Kikuchi. Fangraphs describing that trade as an astronomical return for Toronto, as the Blue Jays sent Yusei Kikuchi to Houston. Kikuchi profiles as kind of a middle-of-the-rotation starter, and for a middle-of-the-rotation starter, the Astros gave up their number 2 and number 3 prospects and a good middle infield prospects for Kikuchi, who has a 6.42 ERA since June 1st. That trade, I think, is a bit of an outlier, but it is an indication of just how expensive it is right now to get quality starting pitching. Because with the new playoff format, we have talked about it for weeks leading up to this deadline. There are so many more teams that believe that they can make a push for the playoffs and will not sell at this deadline, even if they are somewhere vaguely around 500. If they are within 5 or 6 games of that third wild card spot, there are teams that are just flat out not selling. And it makes it a lot harder to find talent, and you're limiting the player pool available. Think about teams like the Rangers, 6 games out of the 5 wild card spot. Quality starting pitchers like Max Scherzer, Nathan Eovaldi, they are not selling. Like that's a perfect indication right there. They are a below 500 team, and they are not selling because they believe that they can make a push. The San Francisco Giants, we have seen reports that, yes, they offloaded Jorge Soler, but they might hold on to Blake Snell because they are trying to make a push. They're 2 games below 500, 4 games out of that wild card spot. The Cubs are still trying to buy a little bit. They're 6 games out of the final wild card spot. So there are just not a lot of teams that are going to be sellers. And for the teams that are sellers, that have decent starting pitching, all of a sudden, the price tag has gone way, 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 way up.
And not to mention that Kikuchi only has two plus months left of team control.
Yeah, that's a rental.
Whereas, exactly. Whereas with the Rogers situation, you get him for more than 2 seasons, for that matter. So that's like the biggest difference here, as well as the amount of players you're getting in exchange. So I think you look at Rogers, you are giving up Connor Norby, who is the number 5 prospect in the Orioles system. So that is a big loss to this Orioles team moving forward. However, you do kind of look at that comparison with the Astros and what they had to give up for Kikuchi and everything. So I think that you're right. It really is just kind of that's the theme across the board for this trade deadline. Yeah,
let's start with Rogers before we get to the Norby Stowers aspect of it. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, he is under team control through 2026, so you have Trevor Rogers for the rest of this season and the next 2 years. He's only 26 years old. It's a former All-Star and a former first-round pick. 21 starts this year. He's got a 4.53 ERA, 7.5 strikeouts per 9, walking close to 4 batters per 9. The whip is over 1,500. You look at the advanced metrics, a lot of stuff in the blue. Mm-hmm. For me, this looks like a trade where Rogers, as he is right now, has a pretty decent floor. He's made 21 starts this year, as I mentioned. He has allowed more than 4 earned runs just one time in those 21 starts. In 16 of his 21 starts this year, he has completed at least 5 innings. So the ERA is inflated a little bit because he had one really bad outing where I think it was 2 1/3, 8 earned runs. That'll get that ERA right up there. But outside of that, it's quality, not outstanding production, where it's 5-ish innings most outings. And as I mentioned, he is very, very rarely allowing more than 4 earned runs. So the upside hasn't necessarily been showing itself this season, but the floor is still good enough to keep you in games. And when you look at why Rogers makes sense in this rotation, he doesn't profile as a number 2, number 3 type of guy.
Yeah, certainly.
You already got one of those in Zach Eflin. If that was your priority at the deadline to say, hey, we want a guy who could start a playoff game as our number 2 or number 3 starter and give us a lot of upside, that's Zach Eflin. Trevor Rogers fills out your rotation. For the next 2.5 years, he profiles as a number 4-ish type of starter. I would put him in a similar category to Dean Kramer, where again, I don't know if the upside is there like it is with Kramer. We know Dean can give you, 10 plus strikeouts in a really outstanding outing here and there. But even if Trevor Rogers is just your 5th starter and he is giving you good, not great outings every 5th day, I think you take that right now because Chase McDermott, Cade Povich, for as much upside as they have and for as fun as it may have been to go, hey, let's keep them in the rotation for the rest of the season, Trevor Rogers feels like a move that is helping your bullpen a little bit more too, where you're not going to have a 3-4 inning start out of Povich or McDermott. Rogers can pretty consistently give you 5+.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what you said about upside too, because you take a look, he's former All-Star. You take a look at his 2021 year as well, 2.64 ERA, better than his expected ERA that year, and was sitting at 95 miles per hour. So I think that you take that 2021 year and you basically build him back up to the All-Star version of himself and a healthy version of himself because he is coming back from injury, then I think there is a lot of hope for Trevor Rogers to move forward with this Orioles system once he's fully back from these injuries. I think it was bicep, back injuries. So getting him back, especially with that team control, will be huge. Also relatively low cost, about $1.5 million contract this year. And improvements in walks each month since April. So I do think that there are some good signs with Trevor Rogers. And you're right. I mean, you went into this trade deadline knowing that Baltimore was going to look for arms. They were going to look for starters. They were going to look for bullpen arms. You got Zach Eflin to fill that number 3 role, and Trevor Rogers is another depth guy in this rotation.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, he is shown signs of improvement lately. You mentioned the walk numbers getting better. He's got a 3.48 ERA in his last 10 starts. So you take out that blow-up start towards the beginning of the year, and you're looking at a mid to high 3s ERA type of pitcher. And when the Orioles make a trade or even a waiver claim, I feel like I always just run to StatCast because there always seems to be something there for me to point to and say, hey, this is why the Orioles traded for that guy. With Trevor Rogers, it's an interesting story because a lot of the advanced metrics as they stand right now don't look awesome, but to me, he just screams somebody who could use some mechanical tweaks and has high upside. Because again, this is a former first-round pick, a former All-Star in 2021. The pedigree is there. He was up there in the Rookie of the Year race. He was up there in Cy Young voting. So the upside is clearly there. When you look at Rogers' delivery, he almost looks a little easy to see. It's a tall frame. He's got kind of a weird windup behind his back. It almost feels like the pitches are really easy to see from his delivery. So I'm interested to see if the Orioles will be able to make any mechanical tweaks with him there. But as mentioned, as he stands right now, it's a solid floor and it's good team control. And I think the risk is worth taking with somebody like Rogers, where you have seen good numbers and you could potentially get him back to a solid spot. Now, the fastball velocity has dropped a little bit over the last few years. Maybe some of that is due to injury. Maybe some of it is mechanical stuff. I don't know. But when you're looking a little deeper at his pitches as well, his changeup has really, really good vertical movement, but it's getting hit a lot. It's a batting average over 300, which tells me, okay, it's a good pitch shape-wise. It's doing the things you want it to do spin rate-wise and movement-wise. Why is it still getting hit? So maybe it's a location thing. Maybe it's a mechanics thing. Same thing can be said for the four-seam fastball and the sinker. They both have really good horizontal movement. So I think with Rogers, you like what you see with the pitches, even though it's not really showing up on the field. So yeah, the numbers on the surface don't look awesome with the 4.53 ERA. As I mentioned, that's a little bit inflated. But I think there's stuff to work with there that this makes enough sense to me. Where, yeah, get him in the building for 2.5 years and see if you can get him back. It doesn't need to be all-star form. It doesn't need to be one of the better pitchers in the league like he was looking to be in 2021. But if you can get him to be a solid number 3, number 4 type of guy, I think he has the upside to potentially start a playoff game down the line, right? I don't think he's there right now, but this makes sense as somebody to get in the building with what the Orioles have been able to do with pitching at the big league level.
Yeah, you're also quite simply getting another left-handed pitcher, which is short in the rotation right now, aside from Grayson Rodriguez. So bringing him in, who knows, maybe pitching Camden Yards will help him a little bit. So I think that this is purely to round out that pitching rotation depth. Whether you're upset about giving up Connor Norby or not, which is understandable, pitching was the main concern.
Yeah.
So I think that is the biggest takeaway to think about in this year where starting pitchers has been kind of bleak.
Yeah, I think, look, if you were hoping that this deadline, as we have now reached 6 o'clock and we have not seen tweets about the Orioles trading for another pitcher here, so unless something comes in after the deadline, then these will be the pitchers that the Orioles have moving forward in the starting rotation. I think you have to be pretty pleased with what the Orioles have done here, based on the starting pitchers that got moved, because as of right now, again, it is 6 o'clock. We are not seeing anything about Tarek Skubal getting traded. We are not seeing anything about Garrett Crochet getting traded. We had heard a lot of reports about the Tigers saying, hey, we don't really want to move Tarek Skubal, understandably so. And over the last few days, we had seen reports out of Garrett Crochet's camp where he was saying he wasn't going to pitch in the playoffs or move in the bullpen unless he got a contract extension. And that's a hefty demand when you're already trying to make a trade for somebody, and then you have to factor in, okay, he's not going to pitch in the playoffs, which is a main reason that we're trading for him at the deadline unless we give him a contract. Like, that's a lot of, you got to check mark Z and Y before you get to reason X that you're trading for Garrett Crochet. So when you're talking about the starting pitchers that have been traded before this deadline, I would argue Zach Eflin is right up there with the best ones.
Yeah.
I mean, Jack Flaherty has reportedly been traded to the Dodgers. We know how that Flaherty deal went last year in Baltimore. It wasn't exactly what anybody was hoping for at the deadline. It would have been a surprise reunion there. Unless I'm missing a starting pitcher that has been moved, without Skubal and without Garrett Crochet, I think there is a valid argument to be made that Zach Eflin is the best starting pitcher to get moved at this deadline. And the Orioles got him in comparison to, I mean, you could compare it to the Trevor Rogers deal, and you could compare it to certainly somebody like the Yusei Kikuchi deal. You could argue it's one of the best values for a starting pitcher at this deadline as well. So I think when you're looking holistically, we'll get to Norby and Stowers specifically here in a minute, but when you're looking holistically at what the Orioles got and what they gave up, it's Connor Norby, Kyle Stowers, Mac Horvath, Jackson Baumeister, and Matthew Etzel for Zach Eflin, who will start a playoff game for you and is a very good number 3, if not a good number 2. And Trevor Rogers, who rounds out your rotation and at the very least will give you some solid innings. I think that's a job very well done in the starting rotation front for Baltimore.
Yeah, and I also think it's easy to kind of look as the closer you get to the trade deadline, 6 p.m., that it's going to be a larger splash when it comes to these trades. And I think for the Orioles, it's been the opposite. I think that Eflin was quite literally a steal. I mean, you are going to lose some depth in that farm system later down the road with those 3 prospects that you named earlier. But I do think that Eflin is the most immediate impact that you're going to get.
Yep.
You do have him for control, and same with Trevor Rogers. That was a big characteristic that you and I had talked about that the Orioles would need is team control for this pitching rotation, especially when you had all the injuries in the beginning of the year with Bradish, Means, Wells, you name it. So I think that those two check that box extremely well. You check the box of just getting starters in general. So you're right. I think that you're not giving up Jackson Holliday. You're not giving up Samuel Basayo and Kobe Mayo. And I think that those are the top 3 that were like the untouchables that we discussed.
Yeah,
as well.
Absolutely. You got, as mentioned, a frontline type of starter in Zach Eflin and somebody who rounds out the rotation in Trevor Rogers, and you didn't have to give up. You can call them, the big 3 with Jackson Holliday and Samuel Basayo and Kobe Mayo. You also didn't have to give up guys that were big league contributors already in Colton Cowser and Heston Kjerstad. We have now reached 6:04. There are still reports coming in about different trades. The Cardinals sending Dylan Carlson to the Rays just after the deadline, so just an indication that, hey, it is 6:04, but reports and things will still roll in. Let's talk about Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers.
Sure.
The return that the Marlins get for Trevor Rogers. I think on the surface, you can say that looks like a big price tag because Connor Norby is a really good prospect. Kyle Stowers has shown good things at the big league level. But again, yes, you can say that's a big price tag. I think a more apt thing to say is just that is the price tag right now for a starting pitcher. I think the Orioles did very, very well return-wise in the Zach Eflin deal, but in the current state of the pitching market, this is what it takes to get somebody like Trevor Rogers, who is a younger, controllable starter, and it's Kyle Stowers and Connor Norby. Starting with Norby, he was up at the big league roster right now, due in large part to the injury to Jorge Mateo. He comes up and gets some regular reps at second base. I think at the big league level for now, we're going to see Jordan Westberg at second, Ramon Arias at third base. Who knows? We could see somebody like Jackson Holliday in a few days. Terran Vavra has been called up for now. Not clear at this point whether that is a long-term move to get Vavra some playing time. We know he has gotten playing time in the big leagues in the past, or if this is just kind of a whirlwind right now and you didn't want to send up Jackson Holliday for a night game today he wouldn't get to, and an afternoon game tomorrow, and then, maybe he just meets the team in Cleveland. Who knows?
Yeah.
But Connor Norby had looked very solid in the time that he had gotten in the big leagues, but I think the biggest takeaway is with both of these guys is just that these are 2 good prospects that, we are wishing all the best in Miami. And I'm excited to see both of them get some regular playing time because that's just not a thing that was really going to happen here in Baltimore. I know that through a 162-game season, it takes more than the 13 position players on the 26-man roster to get through a year. But Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers had an uphill battle to consistent playing time at the big league level. Sure, Norby was a fill-in right now, and he's filled in admirably with Jorge Mateo's injury. Yes, Kyle Stowers profiles as a 4th, 5th outfielder type that could have gotten some run if there were injuries or other moves or whatever. But Connor Norby is going to have a hard time finding playing time behind Jackson Holliday and Jordan Westberg. Kyle Stowers was having a very hard time finding playing time behind Colton Cowser and Heston Kjerstad. So as good as those players may have looked in their limited stints here in the big leagues, as good as they may be going forward. And again, hope that those guys are great in Miami because it would be another just feather in the cap for Michael Elias in this player development system. But they were not going to get consistent playing time here in Baltimore. And instead, you get somebody who's going to go out and post every 5th day. It's hard to give up good prospects. It's hard to give up good players. But there wasn't really a path here for either of those guys.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest thing is they weren't going to be regulars in the Orioles lineup in the near future, that is. And for the Marlins, it's likely that they will be regulars. So I think that it'll be great for them to be able to make a big difference in Miami. you had said before we even started, Miami's doing very well with this.
They are doing excellently at this deadline. Yes.
Almost completely rebuilding for that matter. But so I think it'll be very exciting to see Kyle Stowers and Connor Norby get the playing time that they deserve in Miami and see just how much of a big difference they can make. Also, not to mention, now, granted, this is an extremely small sample size, but Connor Norby was only 1 for 6 against left-handed pitchers, and you know that is a big need for the Orioles right now, regardless of only 7 at
a slightly small sample size.
Very
in the big
small,
leagues, yeah.
But with that, you just know that that's kind of a need, and you are losing a right-handed hitter with Norby being gone. But I do think that they're going to be able to make a big impact with Miami, and I think that that's great for them.
Yeah, that's awesome for them. As I said, I'm excited to see Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers get consistent playing time somewhere because it just flat out wasn't going to happen here. Yeah. The Orioles are operating at this trade deadline from a place of so much luxury. Connor Norby, in 25 other organizations in baseball, you are clamoring for him to get starts at the big league level. And sure, maybe there were some Orioles fans that were doing that already, but Jackson Holliday seems to be your second baseman of the future. All things going to plan with injuries and things like that, Jackson Holliday also seems to figure to be your second baseman for right now. I think Jackson Holliday is probably your second baseman going into the playoffs. I don't know if Connor Norby is on this 26-man roster if everybody is healthy, and I don't know if he's on this 26-man roster when Kobe Mayo and Jackson Holliday get called up here at some point in the near future. Mm-hmm. That's just the reality of what Baltimore has to work with. So you are able to go into this deadline with, I don't want to say expendable because that's not the right word for it. Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers are still valuable pieces and valuable players and valuable people as well. It was, that's the tough part of a trade deadline like this where you have a team that's been so close.
Business,
right. It's a team that's been so close coming up together through the minor leagues. It's hard to move on from guys like Norby and Stowers, who were both second-round picks, have come up through the organization, made really good friends, and looked really good in the process in the minors and up in the brief stint with the majors as well. But that's the nature of where the Orioles are right now. You can afford to lose really good prospects because you have unbelievable prospects that still need to get playing time. That's just where they are.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that you could argue, like, with the end of the deadline that the Orioles could probably still need a really strong bullpen arm. But I think that when you are getting both of those two starting pitchers at the end of the day, that was the biggest need because you do have it was wishy-washy from the start of the season. And I think that with these, yes, you're giving up Connor Norby and the rest of those prospects and Kyle Stowers, but I do think that this is a good deal. I mean, I'm seeing comments on YouTube that Eflin is trash and Roger is trash. I would have to disagree. I mean, Eflin has a 2.7% walk rate.
Zach Eflin is
in the
certainly
99th
not
percentile.
Trash.
And a 33% chase rate. So I think that is, I would have to debunk that one, unfortunately. And Rogers, I think, is going to be extremely valuable for that rounding out of the starting rotation. So I think let's cool it on the judgments a little bit right now. It's still 11 minutes past the trade deadline.
This was always going to happen with the trade deadline. If the Orioles didn't trade their 37th ranked prospect for Tarek Skubal, there's always going to be someone saying that they could have gotten something better. But all in all, starting rotation-wise, I think the Orioles did very well here. Another area where the Orioles needed some help was a right-handed hitter. Mm-hmm. A team that we knew was going to sell was the Chicago White Sox, and a name that had been tossed around as a potential right-handed bat was Eloy Jimenez. So let's talk about Jimenez here. He is struggling right now. 642 OPS on the season, hitting just 240. The power has been sapped a little bit for Jimenez. Just 5 home runs, 9 doubles on the year. We are used to seeing a slugging percentage out of Jimenez that is about 100 points higher than the 345 that we are seeing right now. So if you were to trade for Jimenez at this point, that would be a buy low deal because it is an incredibly high upside bat. He signed a 6-year, $43 million deal, through the 2026 season, but the 2025 and 2026 seasons have team options. This is pretty much exclusively a designated hitter as well. So if you're looking at Jimenez, it is not as an outfielder. He has started 57 games as a DH this year, started 1 game in the outfield, in right field. So this is not a outfield depth type of acquisition. If you were going after Jimenez, this is to be a designated hitter, to be a right-handed hitter. Jimenez is an interesting case because if you can get a hitter like that back to somewhere close to his 2022 form, where in 84 games he hit .295 with a .500 slugging percentage and an .858 OPS with 16 homers and 12 doubles, that is an unbelievably valuable hitter in the middle of a lineup.
Yeah.
But the question is, and if you are making a move for Eloy Jimenez, you have to be confident that you can get him back to somewhere close to that form or even closer to his 2023 form where he hit .272 with a .758 OPS. He's got to be at least a league average hitter because he is a designated hitter and he's not going to give you value defensively.
Yeah. And I mean, you even look at his underlying metrics, average exit velocity of 92. That's in the 91st percentile. 93rd percentile for hard hit rate at 50%. And also, I think you said a big need was right-handed hitters. And that's true because you look at the right-handed hitters right now on the roster and Christian Pache, who's .229 against lefty pitchers this year. Santander is a switch hitter, obviously .230 against lefties. James McCann, .191 against lefties. Ramon Arias, .204, and Jordan Westberg, .237. You're losing Austin Hayes, who was .328 against lefties. That was a big loss for this one reason, among others, obviously. Great leader, both on and off the field. But for just this stat specifically, Eloy Jimenez is .304 against lefty pitchers this season. So I think that is a really good piece of information to hold on to for getting him, if you were to get him.
Yeah, that's a platoon bat right there. And with what the Orioles need currently, you're not looking for an outfielder that's going to start every day. Somebody like even Austin Hayes, we'd mentioned before, where Hayes was taking some at-bats away from somebody like Colton Cowser or Heston Kjerstad because you were starting him in the outfield. He needed a good amount of reps, things like that. Eloy Jimenez would just slot in as a designated hitter. So I would imagine in an Orioles lineup, it would probably take some at-bats away from Ryan O'Hearn would probably not be getting starts against left-handed pitching if you had a first base DH hybrid role of a Mountie and a Jimenez, right? It's a right-handed bat with a ton of upside, and in a just pure platoon situation would make a lot of sense, as we have now hit 6/16, and there are still trades coming in and things to potentially break down here for the Orioles. Nothing official yet over the last half hour or so, but as we mentioned, a name like Eloy Jimenez as a powerful right-handed bat makes sense in Baltimore with the White Sox as sellers and the Orioles needing to replace their production that they lost in Austin Hayes as a right-handed hitter. Goodness. The next even 15 minutes or so, there are still going to be a lot of reports rolling in, and it could be for the Orioles as well. So keep your eyes peeled on whatever the Orioles may be doing, because even though the 6 o'clock deadline has passed,
it's not over yet.
It is not over yet, and we could still see some moves happening as we are getting closer to game time here. But the Orioles trade for Trevor Rogers this afternoon. The starting rotation is solidified, and we could see some more moves rolling in here as the 6 o'clock deadline has passed, but that doesn't mean the moves have passed, so we could see a lot more rolling in here. But that'll just about do it for us here on the Bird's Nest. Thanks for hanging out as the trade deadline came and went. Thanks for hanging out in the comment section. Sorry if you called Zach Eflin trash and then we called you out. You kind of deserved it because that's a bad take. But, that's what we're here for. Big thank you to Amy Jennings behind the scenes for producing this one. We're going to have a lot more coverage for you here on our MASN Orioles social pages and on the Bird's Nest, which you can catch live every Wednesday at 11 a.m. on YouTube and Facebook, or after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts or your digital shows. You can find us here on the Bird's Nest. For Andy Klaff, I am Brendan Mortensen, and we'll catch you next time.